Blood was the first thing I tasted before I even understood that I was lying on the cold tile floor of my parents' living room. It slid past the corner of my mouth, warm and metallic, mixing with the dust that always gathered near the baseboards. My vision pulsed in and out of clarity as I stared up at the ceiling fan spinning above me, each blade slicing through the air with a slow, heavy rhythm that felt out of place with the chaos erupting only inches away. Ethan stood over me, his chest rising and falling, his knuckles still curled into a fist that hovered near my face. The look in his eyes was not rage anymore. It was something deeper. Something twisted a satisfaction he did not bother hiding. He had always been unpredictable, but today he crossed a line I never imagined he would cross, not even in the worst moments of our fractured family history. My mother's shrill voice cut through the ringing in my ears. "Stop pretending. You always exaggerate everything. You made him angry." Her words stung more than the swelling in my cheek. She did not look at the blood. She did not look at the way I struggled to breathe. She only looked at Ethan with the same protective panic she always showed, as if he were the fragile one in the room, instead of the one who had just knocked me down hard enough to make my vision blur. My father let out a bored sigh, folding his arms as if he were watching a rerun of a show he had already seen too many times. "He is just releasing pressure. Do not provoke him, and he will stop." They talked about him like he was a child having a tantrum instead of a grown man who had just punched his sister in the head. I tried to reach for my phone near the coffee table, its screen still lit from my trembling attempt to dial for help. Before my fingers touched it, Ethan kicked it so hard that it skidded beneath the couch. "You are not calling anybody," he growled. His voice trembled not with fear, but with the thrill of control. My pulse spiked and panic crawled up my spine with icy fingers. I rolled onto my side and pushed myself forward inch by inch, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through my ribs every time I breathed. My goal was the sliding door that led to the backyard. The cool morning light streamed through the glass, a sharp contrast to the suffocating darkness inside the room. I could not stand. I could barely crawl. But survival clung to me harder than the pain. My mother stepped into my path before I got far. "Get up, Christina. Apologize to your brother right now." Her tone was cold, commanding, like I had embarrassed her by existing. I lifted my head just enough to see movement through the glass door. Our neighbor, Mrs. Foster, was standing on her porch across the fence, her hand hovering uncertainly over her phone. Our eyes met. She saw the blood. She saw how I could not lift myself properly. She saw Ethan looming behind me like a shadow preparing to swallow anything in front of it. Mrs. Foster took one small step forward, then stopped. Her shoulders tensed, her face twisted with worry, but also with fear. Everyone in the neighborhood knew how volatile my family was. The last time someone called the police on my parents, the retaliation was loud, petty, and relentless. Mrs. Foster lowered her hand, backing into her house, pulling the curtain closed. A hollow ache settled in my chest. Even the people outside were scared of the world I was trapped in. Ethan shouted behind me, his voice exploding through the room. "You think you can turn your back on us? You think you can walk away from this family? You owe us. You owe me." He took a step forward, and I felt his presence like heat crawling up the back of my neck. My father muttered something about me being dramatic. My mother continued her rant about how I always tried to make Ethan look bad. Another drop of blood fell from my chin onto the tile, spreading into a tiny red smear that seemed to summarize my entire life in this house. Pain, silence, blame, and always for him. Somehow, I pulled myself upright long enough to unlock the sliding door. My hands shook violently, slick with sweat and blood, but the lock clicked and the door slid open just enough for me to slip through. Cool air hit me like a slap. My legs buckled beneath me as I stumbled onto the wooden deck. I tried to take one step down, but my foot missed the edge and I fell hard onto the last stair. A burst of white pain shot across my vision. The wooden boards felt rough beneath my palms as I braced myself. Blood dripped from my face onto the aged planks, marking a trail of red behind me. I heard Ethan's footsteps and my mother's shriek fading behind the closed door. And then as I lay there gasping for breath, a single thought formed in my mind with terrifying clarity. If there is another life after this one, I would never choose to be born into this family. I swallowed hard, pulled in a shaky breath, and whispered to myself with the last ounce of strength I had, "Enough. I will end this family before it ends me." I never expected to return to my parents' home, and I definitely never expected that stepping back into that house would feel like stepping into the center of a storm that had been quietly brewing for years. My name is Christina, and before everything collapsed, before blood touched the hardwood floor, and before I realized how dangerously warped my family truly was, I used to believe that surviving childhood meant the worst was already behind me. I was wrong. I grew up in a house where love was conditional, uneven, and frequently weaponized. My parents raised 2 children, but they only ever nurtured one. Ethan, my older brother by 2 years, was the center of every conversation, every sacrifice, and every excuse. He was the pride of the family, even when he did nothing to deserve it. I, on the other hand, was the responsibility, the fixer, the one who was supposed to understand, to forgive, to give, to fill in the cracks he created. People often ask how a family becomes this kind of twisted ecosystem of favoritism and emotional neglect, but in my case, it never felt like a transition. It felt like the way things had always been. When we were little, my mother would call Ethan her sweet boy, her miracle, the one who made her feel whole. She would press her hand to his cheek as if he were something fragile and precious. With me, she mostly pressed her expectations. I was told to be patient, to be strong, to be quiet, to understand. My father reinforced the rules in his own detached way. He believed in structure and order, and because Ethan constantly broke, both, my father believed I had to compensate. When Ethan crashed his bike into the neighbor's fence, I was the one scolded for not stopping him. When he failed a class, I was asked why I did not tutor him. When he lied, I was urged to take responsibility so he would not get punished. My childhood memories are full of these moments, small and countless, shaping the hierarchy of our home in a way I did not yet understand. I learned early that affection was something I had to earn while Ethan received it effortlessly. By the time we became teenagers, our roles were carved into stone. Ethan pursued attention and trouble with equal enthusiasm. He had phases of wanting to become a musician, an athlete, a businessman, a filmmaker, depending on the week. Each time he failed at something, my parents rewrote the narrative to protect him. They blamed the school, the coach, the teacher, the economy, bad luck. Never him. Never their perfect son. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, studied, worked part-time, learned how to survive without depending on anyone in that house. When I turned 16 and got my first job at a local diner, my parents were proud for exactly 5 minutes before asking if I could help them pay a bill that Ethan had forgotten about. That was the first time I handed over my hard-earned money to cover something he had messed up. It would not be the last. The older we grew, the worse the imbalance became. Ethan grew into someone volatile, someone who lashed out when things did not go his way, someone who believed the world owed him something because our parents had always convinced him it did. I grew into someone tired of being the responsible one, tired of being the emotional punching bag, tired of being the afterthought in my own family. After finishing school, I moved away, became a nurse, and built a life that felt real and stable. I had friends who respected me, coworkers who appreciated me, and a sense of peace I never had at home. I visited my parents occasionally out of duty rather than desire, but every time I walked through their door, the air felt heavy again, as if the house remembered who I used to be and demanded I step back into my place. I would have stayed away permanently if not for the phone call about my father needing heart surgery. My mother called me sobbing, telling me he needed help, that they needed me, that Ethan was dealing with too much stress to be of use. I did not ask questions. I packed my things and drove home, telling myself it would only be temporary. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought family duty still meant something. But the moment I arrived, I could feel something was wrong. Ethan greeted me with a smirk that hinted at the resentment he carried like a second skin. My mother hugged me, but her arms were stiff, her eyes scanning me the way she used to when she was about to tell me everything I should have done differently. My father thanked me for coming, but his voice had that familiar tone of expectation rather than gratitude. Over the next several days, I settled into a routine of caring for my father, organizing doctor appointments, handling medication schedules, and cooking meals. And slowly, the subtle cracks in the household widened until I could see everything clearly. Ethan had sunk deeper into his gambling habits. The house was full of tension, money was tight, bills were overdue. My parents looked worn and nervous, whispering to each other whenever they thought I was not listening. Instead of appreciation for helping, I received more demands. Could I cover this bill? Could I handle that issue? Could I give Ethan some cash because he was having a rough week? The pressure built like steam inside a closed room. Every day, I felt myself slipping back into the old role, the one where I was the fixer, the provider, the one who had to sacrifice because Ethan could not. I tried to ignore the signs. I tried to keep my focus on helping my father recover. But underneath it all, the truth was waiting to explode. The family I returned to was not a family anymore. It was a sinking ship, and they expected me to plug every hole while Ethan drilled new ones. And I was still naive enough to believe I could survive it. I did not yet know that the moment the blood hit the tile, my place in this family would end forever. I did not know that everything leading up to that moment was only the beginning, because the truth about my family, the truth I had spent years avoiding, was this: they were never going to stop using me until I stopped them myself. People often think favoritism appears suddenly, like a switch flipping or a parent waking up one day and choosing one child over the other. But in my family, it grew slowly and quietly, settling into the walls of our home until it was impossible to tell where it ended and where we began. Looking back, I cannot pinpoint the exact day when everything tilted in Ethan's favor, because to me it always felt tilted. Even as a child, I understood something was different about the way my parents looked at him. It was in the way my mother's eyes softened when she spoke his name, and in the way my father's shoulders relaxed when Ethan walked into the room. With me, their voices carried a sharper edge, an expectation, a weight they never placed on him. It began in small ways, almost invisible to anyone outside our house. Ethan would spill juice on the carpet during breakfast, and my mother would laugh and call it an accident. If I spilled even a single drop, she would rush over with a dish rag and a lecture about responsibility. When Ethan forgot his homework, my father would talk to the teacher about giving him another chance. If I forgot mine, I was grounded for a week with a warning that my future would collapse if I kept being careless. I was 5 the first time I realized I was held to a different standard. Ethan had thrown a toy truck at me in the living room, hitting me hard enough to leave a bruise on my arm. I cried and ran to my mother, hoping she would comfort me or at least scold him. Instead, she wiped my tears and told me I needed to be more understanding because boys express themselves differently. Then she gave Ethan a cookie to calm him down while I sat silently on the couch, wondering why my pain required me to be patient. As we grew older, the differences matured, with us becoming more obvious and more damaging. By the time Ethan and I reached middle school, his misbehavior had become a normal part of household life. He got detention for pushing another boy in the hallway, and my parents spent the entire evening complaining about how the school overreacted. When I received detention for arguing with a teacher who wrongly accused me of cheating my parents, grounded me for a month, and took away every privilege I had. I remember sitting at the dinner table that night watching Ethan smirk while I stared at my untouched plate. It was the first time I thought to myself that maybe being good would never be enough. When Ethan entered high school, the favoritism turned into hero worship. My mother bragged to her friends about his height and his potential to be an athlete even though he never went to practice. She insisted he was gifted special misunderstood. She claimed teachers did not know how to reach him because they lacked vision. Meanwhile, every achievement I earned came with a criticism. If I got an A, my father said I should have gotten an A+. If I won an award, my mother said it must not have been very competitive. I was taught that nothing I did was exceptional, while everything Ethan did required applause. The older Ethan grew, the more dangerous the favoritism became. He began getting into fights after school, stealing bikes, drinking with seniors behind the football field. My parents dismissed every warning call from the school. He is under a lot of pressure. Boys act differently. He just needs time. They painted him as a misunderstood soul, a fragile genius who needed protection from the world. Yet whenever I tried to speak up about how unfair things were, my parents turned it into a discussion about my lack of empathy and my inability to support my brother. One afternoon when Ethan was 16 and I was 14, he smashed the back window of our family car after losing his temper during an argument with my father. My mother ran outside, hugging him and telling him everything would be okay. She whispered that she would take care of everything before turning to me and demanding to know why I did not stop the argument sooner. I had not even been in the room. The seeds of favoritism were watered with excuses and nurtured with denial. Eventually, they bloomed into something stronger than love, stronger than logic, and stronger than any sense of fairness. No matter what Ethan did wrong, my parents crafted a version of events where he was the victim and I was the one who should have prevented the outcome. Even in moments where Ethan physically lashed out at me, my parents insisted I provoked him. They said it was my responsibility to keep the peace because I was the level-headed one, the reasonable one, the one who could take it. Ethan, in their eyes, was too fragile to be held accountable. They raised him to believe he had a permanent safety net. They raised me to be the net. Over the years, this dynamic shaped us into two entirely different people. Ethan grew into someone who never feared consequences because he had never faced them. I grew into someone who constantly feared making even the smallest mistake because I knew it would be magnified. He felt entitled. I felt invisible. And even though I built my life far from that house, became independent, successful, and stable, returning home meant stepping back into those old roles, whether I wanted to or not. I should have seen it sooner, the way each memory was pointing toward the disaster that would one day unfold. But when you grow up in a system like that, you learn to normalize the unfairness. You learn to carry the weight quietly. You tell yourself that the people who raised you could not possibly be doing real harm. It took the sound of my own blood hitting the floor to finally understand that favoritism was not just a childhood wound. It was the weapon they had sharpened for years. And I was the one they meant to cut with it. Ethan's decline was not a sudden fall, but a slow sinking, as if he were stepping into quicksand 1 inch at a time, while everyone around him insisted he was standing on solid ground. For years, my parents protected him from consequences, building a cushion beneath every bad decision he made, and that cushion slowly turned into a pit he kept dropping deeper into without ever realizing he was falling. By the time he reached adulthood, the boy who once broke windows and picked fights had evolved into a man whose life revolved around chaos, denial, and addiction. His downward spiral truly began the moment he discovered gambling. At first, it was harmless, or at least that was the story he fed us. Friendly poker nights with coworkers, small bets on football games, a few trips to the casino. Nothing dangerous, nothing serious. But Ethan never did anything in moderation. If he dipped his toe into something, he drowned in it. Within months, he stopped talking about poker nights and started hiding receipts, slipping into the house at impossible hours, and making phone calls behind closed doors with a tension in his voice that even my parents could not ignore. Whenever I visited, I noticed new patterns. Ethan pacing the kitchen with dark circles under his eyes. Ethan snapping at our mother when she asked about his shifts. Ethan asking my father for money with that entitled tilt to his voice that meant he had already decided he would get what he wanted. Then the requests for money intensified. First, they were framed as emergencies, then as temporary loans, then as obligations he believed we owed him simply because he existed. My father handed him cash as if Ethan were entitled to it by birthright. My mother emptied envelopes she kept in the top drawer of her dresser, the ones where she stored grocery money or holiday savings. I watched them hand over everything they had, even when the cracks in their finances began to show. Late bill notices piled up on the counter. Groceries became cheaper and smaller. Lights were turned off earlier in the evening. Still, Ethan took more. Still, they let him. Soon, the people Ethan owed money to were no longer coworkers or friends from the bar. They were strangers with cold voices and colder intentions. Men who called the house at midnight and hung up when I answered. Men who left notes on the porch demanding repayment. One evening, I found my mother crying in the laundry room, clutching a crumpled letter. When I asked what was wrong, she told me Ethan was just stressed and needed our support. But I saw fear in her eyes, fear she refused to name. Instead of confronting reality, my parents clung tighter to their delusions. They insisted Ethan was under pressure. They insisted he needed compassion. They insisted it was just a phase. I lost count of how many times they said that word as if it could erase the growing danger around us. The truth was simple. Ethan did not believe rules applied to him because they never had. And now, as an adult, the stakes were higher, the consequences sharper. Yet he continued acting like the world would contort itself to accommodate his needs. He quit job after job. He blamed every employer for his failures. One boss was too strict. Another did not appreciate him. One coworker threatened him. Another was out to sabotage him. Every story he told painted him as the victim. And every time he quit, my parents consoled him like he had survived something traumatic instead of causing the problem himself. When I tried to intervene, pointing out the patterns, my mother accused me of jealousy. My father said I was acting superior. Ethan laughed in my face and told me to stay out of things I knew nothing about. But I knew. I knew because I had spent years being the one who was held responsible while he was held untouchable. And I knew because I recognized addiction when I saw it. In the hospital, I had treated countless patients destroyed by the same compulsions Ethan was now feeding. The signs were unmistakable. Sleeplessness, mood swings, irritability, lies, debts, desperation hidden behind arrogance. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Ethan got involved with the kind of people who did not bluff, the kind who did not accept excuses, the kind who showed up when you least expected them. One night, my mother called me whispering into the phone, her voice shaking as she told me someone had banged on the front door demanding Ethan come out. She begged me to come home, saying they needed me, that Ethan needed me, that I was the only one who could calm him down. I wanted to say no. I should have said no. But years of conditioning had taught me that refusing my family meant I was failing them. So I went. I walked into a house filled with tension so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Ethan was pacing with one hand on his head, muttering to himself. My father was sitting in the chair staring blankly at the floor. My mother was wringing her hands like she could squeeze the fear out of her palms. When I asked what happened, Ethan shouted that it was none of my business. My parents insisted I should stay calm, that everything would work out, that the worst was over. But the worst had not even started, because Ethan was not only drowning, he was pulling all of us under with him. His downward spiral became the justification for every cruel expectation placed on me. I was told to pay bills to keep the peace. I was told to forgive his temper because he was under stress. I was told to take responsibility for problems I did not create. And slowly, my parents turned his failures into my obligations until the entire house felt like a ticking bomb wired directly to Ethan's rage. I did not know it then, but every decision they made to protect him was shaping the moment he would one day turn that rage on me. And when he finally did, the explosion was not shocking. It was predictable. It was inevitable. It was the final stage of a downward spiral my parents had spent years helping him dig. My life during this period felt like a series of long shifts that never truly ended, as if the hospital where I worked and the home I returned to every evening were simply two different units of the same exhausting emergency. At work, I was surrounded by beeping monitors, fluorescent lights, and the steady rhythm of crises that demanded precision patience and emotional strength. At home, I faced a different kind of crisis, one without alarms or medical charts, one that drained me far more than any 12-hour shift ever could. Every morning I woke before sunrise, slipping quietly out of the guest room to avoid Ethan, who usually slept until noon or later. I made coffee for myself and for my father, who was recovering slowly from surgery, and I handled his medication schedule with the same diligence I gave to my ICU patients. Caring for him never bothered me. What drained me was doing it while my mother hovered nearby, criticizing every small decision as if she expected me to fail. She questioned the dosage even though the doctor had written it clearly. She demanded I explain every pill even though she had the packet in her hand. She insisted I cook meals a certain way, clean in a specific order, and maintain a level of perfection that she never required from Ethan. Most days I swallowed my frustration because I knew my father needed the help, and I believed that doing the right thing meant keeping my head down and focusing on his recovery. But as the weeks passed, a sinking feeling settled into me, a heaviness I could not shake. The more I helped, the more my parents expected. If I arrived home late because a patient had crashed at work, my mother accused me of abandoning the family. If I spent a few hours resting in my room, Ethan complained that I was hiding from responsibilities. If I dared take an evening walk to clear my mind, My father asked why I was being selfish when there was so much to do. The pressure crept into every moment. I felt it in the way my mother sighed whenever I walked into a room, in the way Ethan glared whenever I passed him in the hallway, in the way my father's disappointment filled the house like a draft that seeped into every corner. I began working extra shifts at the hospital just to avoid being at home telling myself I needed the money, but the truth was, I needed the peace. At work, I was competent, respected, trusted. My decisions mattered. My skills were valued. When I told a patient's family the plan for the night, they thanked me. When I comforted someone in pain, they held my hand and listened. At home, it was the opposite. My parents dismissed everything I did as bare minimum. Ethan mocked my career, saying real jobs did not require scrubs. The contrast between who I was inside the hospital and who I was forced to be inside my parents' house was jarring. It was like living in two parallel realities. In one, I was an adult who saved lives. In the other, I was a child who could not speak without being corrected. The pressure built quietly but steadily, like a pot left simmering on the stove with the lid clamped down tight. I began losing sleep, waking with my heart racing for reasons I could not name. I forgot to eat some days. My hands shook when I poured coffee. Coworkers noticed the change before I did. One afternoon during a rare lull in the unit, my colleague Sam pulled me aside. "You look exhausted," he said gently. "Not just tired, something is wrong." I tried to brush it off, insisting I was just adjusting to living with my parents again, but Sam shook his head. "I know what burnout looks like." "This is something else," his words lodged in my mind. Something else was an understatement. It felt like I was being squeezed from the inside out, crushed by a lifetime of expectations I never agreed to carry. Financial pressure was the next layer. My parents never said it outright, but they expected me to help pay bills. Gas, groceries, utilities, prescriptions. It started with small requests. "Can you grab bread on the way home? Can you cover the copay?" Soon it became envelopes left on my dresser with sticky notes that said, "Due Friday." They never asked Ethan. They never even considered asking Ethan. The pressure intensified further when Ethan started pounding on my door late at night. He always claimed he needed money urgently. He always had a new story. A friend stole his wallet. A bartender cheated him. He lost his paycheck. He needed to pay someone back. He never said who. My refusal was never enough to end the conversation. He would rant loudly until my mother joined in telling me I needed to be supportive, that Ethan was going through a hard time. Hard time. Those two words followed me everywhere. They were used to justify every tantrum, every outburst, every threatening step Ethan took toward me. The more stressed he became, the more pressure I felt to absorb the impact. My parents treated my boundaries like obstacles standing in Ethan's way. At work, I carried the weight of other people's emergencies. At home, I was expected to carry Ethan's. The constant pressure began warping my sense of self. I started questioning every decision I made. I stopped talking to friends. I avoided mirrors because I did not want to see how tired I looked. My life felt like a tightrope stretched between duty and survival. One wrong step and everything would snap. The truth was simple but painful. My parents were not asking for help. They were demanding sacrifice. And the more I gave, the more they took. But even with all that pressure crushing me day after day, I still did not see the full danger creeping toward me. I still believed the worst thing Ethan could do was yell or slam doors. I had no idea he was inches away from crossing a line that would shatter everything I thought I understood about family. I had not yet learned that pressure, when ignored long enough, does not fade. It explodes. I never imagined that the first real crack in the fragile illusion of family loyalty would appear in the form of a letter, a plain white envelope tucked beneath the stack of grocery ads and utility bills on the kitchen counter. It arrived on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that smelled like burnt toast and stale coffee, the kind of morning where I had already gone through 3 small arguments with my mother about my father's medication schedule. I picked up the envelope absent-mindedly, expecting it to be another medical bill or insurance update. But the moment I saw my name printed across the top in bold capital letters, something shifted inside me. It was addressed directly to me, not forwarded from work, not a statement from the hospital, not something I had signed up for. I tore the envelope open with my thumb, the sound of ripping paper strangely loud in the quiet kitchen. Inside was a statement from a credit company I had never heard of. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then I saw the words emergency notification and delinquent balance, and my stomach tightened. According to the statement, I owed nearly $7,000 on a credit line I had supposedly opened a year earlier. The last payment was more than 5 months overdue. The interest had climbed, fees had stacked, and now the company was threatening collections. My vision narrowed as I read the page again and again. I felt dizzy, confused, certain there had been a mistake. I had never opened a credit line with this company. I had never seen their logo. I had never even used this type of account. Yet my full name, my correct address, and the last 4 digits of my social security number were printed clearly in the fine print. Something icy and sharp slid down my spine. Identity theft was not unheard of. I had seen patients come in stressed after losing money to scams or fraudulent charges, but identity theft inside your own family was something no one ever warned you about. I carried the letter to the living room where my mother was folding laundry. She looked up when I entered, but did not stop folding. There was always something unsettling about how she continued her chores even during conversations that deserved more attention. "Mom," I said quietly, holding out the paper, "you need to look at this." She took the statement lazily as if I were bothering her and scanned it without much interest. Then, in a tone so casual it made my heartbeat stumble, she said, "Oh, that? Yes, we used your information last year." My mouth fell open. "You did what?" She waved the statement dismissively. "It was for Ethan. He needed help building his credit." Building his credit. The phrase echoed in my head, absurd and insulting. "Mom, that is illegal. You cannot use someone's social security number without permission." She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "Oh, please, Christina. Families share things all the time. It is not illegal when it is for family." The laundry basket thudded softly as she placed a folded towel on top. She looked at me like I was causing an inconvenience, rather than reacting to blatant fraud committed in my name. I felt my pulse pound in my throat. I never signed anything. I never opened this account. How did this even happen? My mother sighed clearly, growing irritated. "Your father handled it. Ethan needed a line of credit to help with some expenses, and since he had trouble qualifying, your father used your name. You were doing well at the hospital. You were the logical choice." The logical choice. As if using my identity was a simple household task, as if it were an errand they had no reason to tell me about. I stared at her shock, freezing the breath in my lungs. My father. He was in the bedroom resting unaware that I was discovering the truth. He had always been the more rational parent, the one who prided himself on doing things properly, but he had used my name without consent, risking my financial stability to give Ethan yet another undeserved lifeline. The betrayal burned deeper than the fear. "You opened a credit line under my name," I repeated slowly, struggling to process the words. "You signed my name on something legal." My mother shrugged. "Your father practiced the signature. He was not trying to hurt you. Ethan needed it. You always said we should help him." "No." I wanted to scream the word. "No, I never said you should destroy my financial life to protect him from himself." But my mother was immune to guilt, immune to logic, immune to the idea that she had crossed a moral and legal boundary. She simply lifted another towel, smoothing the edges with her hands as she added it to the stack. "You are overreacting," she said calmly. "The debt will sort itself out when Ethan gets back on his feet. He just needs time. Time." Ethan had been given decades of time, decades of patience, decades of rescue missions. And after all of that, he was sinking deeper into addiction and violence. But instead of facing that reality, my parents had chosen the easiest target: me. They had sacrificed my credit, my stability, my future, and expected me to continue pretending it was normal. I felt my throat tighten, and for a moment I could not speak. I thought of everything I had built on my own, my career, my apartment, my plans for the future. All of it could collapse because of a credit line I never knew existed. I swallowed hard. I need to talk to Dad. He is resting, my mother snapped. He is recovering. Do not upset him with this nonsense. Nonsense! The room felt smaller, the air thick. I stepped back, gripping the statement so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I finally reached my room, I closed the door behind me and sank onto the edge of the bed. The silence felt suffocating. I stared at the paper again, reading the numbers repeatedly, trying to make sense of how easily they had decided my identity was a tool they could use. My breath trembled as I realized something even worse. If they had done this once, what else had they done? How many accounts had they opened? How many loans had they taken? How many signatures had they copied? My life, the one I had fought so hard to build, suddenly felt fragile, as if one more piece of mail could shatter the entire structure. And for the first time, I felt real fear. Not fear of Ethan, not fear of his temper, but fear of the people who were supposed to protect me, the ones who raised me, the ones who believed my purpose was to save Ethan no matter the cost. I thought the downward spiral had belonged only to him, but I was wrong. My family was dragging me into their collapse, using my name as a lifeline they never intended to repay. And as much as I wanted to believe I could still climb out, the truth weighed heavily inside me. They were willing to destroy me to keep Ethan afloat, and they did not even think they had done anything wrong. That was the day I realized my parents would never choose me. That was the day something hard and unyielding began forming inside my chest. And it was that day, long before Ethan's fist met my skull, when the real betrayal truly began. The days after discovering the debt in my name felt like walking through a fog thick enough to choke on a haze that blurred my thoughts and made every breath feel heavier than the last. I tried to carry on with my routines, working my shifts, keeping my father's medications organized, pretending that everything was fine, but something inside me had shifted in a way I could not undo. I could not look at my parents the same way. I could not look at Ethan without feeling a rising heat in my chest, something between fear and anger, something that had been building quietly for years and was no longer content to stay buried. The psychological pressure in the house intensified almost immediately after I confronted my mother about the fraudulent account. Instead of acknowledging the wrongdoing, she and my father began treating me as if I were the problem. My father refused to discuss it, claiming he was too tired or too stressed or too sick to deal with what he called unnecessary drama. Every time I approached him, he lifted a hand in silent dismissal, as if the conversation were not worth the effort. Sometimes he pretended to sleep as soon as I entered the room. Sometimes he stared straight through me, his expression empty, as if denying the issue would make it disappear. My mother adopted a different tactic. She began making passive-aggressive comments whenever I walked into the kitchen or living room. Things like, "You never let your brother catch a break," or, "Why do you always have to make things so difficult?" or, "We trusted you to help this family, not tear it apart." She acted as if I had betrayed them by discovering what they had done. As if the real offense was not the fraud, but my refusal to stay silent about it. The shift in atmosphere was subtle at first, then suffocating. I felt watched constantly, judged constantly, blamed constantly. Every sigh, every glance, every tone seemed sharpened with resentment. Even my footsteps in the hallway felt too loud, like my presence alone was a disruption. Ethan made everything worse. He never admitted to knowing about the credit line in my name, but the smirk he wore whenever he walked past me said enough. He liked that I was cornered. He liked that my parents had taken something from me for him. And he liked that he was still being protected, still being prioritized, still being shielded by the people who had spent years enabling him. Late at night, he would pace the hallway outside my room, his footsteps heavy and uneven, as if reminding me he was there. Sometimes he tapped on the door with his knuckles, 3 slow knocks that made my skin crawl. When I refused to open the door, he laughed softly under his breath and walked away. Other nights, he banged on the door loudly, demanding money, demanding attention, demanding that I acknowledge him. The sound rattled the frame, jolting me awake with a rush of fear that left my heart pounding. I considered calling the police more than once, but every time I pictured the aftermath. My mother screaming at me, My father refusing to speak to me, Ethan retaliating in some way I could not predict. I tried avoiding everyone in the house as much as possible. I stayed late at the hospital. I ate meals alone in the guest room. I kept the door locked even during the day. But isolation only made the pressure worse. My mother accused me of creating distance. My father accused me of being ungrateful. Ethan accused me of thinking I was better than everyone else. The accusations piled on top of each other like weights pressed onto my chest. At times, the guilt felt almost convincing. That was the cruelest part of psychological pressure. It twisted reality, manipulated emotions, made you question your own judgment, made you wonder if you were overreacting or being too sensitive or expecting too much. I found myself spiraling, replaying conversations in my head, analyzing every phrase, every tone. Was I being unreasonable for wanting my parents to acknowledge the fraud? Was I selfish for refusing to give Ethan money? Was I dramatic for feeling unsafe in a house where I was constantly belittled and blamed? Logic told me I was right. Experience told me I was right. My training as a nurse taught me exactly how emotional manipulation worked. But conditioning was powerful. Conditioning whispered old rules into my mind. Be patient. Be quiet. Be understanding. Be the strong one. Be the responsible one. Be the one who carries the weight. Eventually, the pressure seeped into my sleep. I woke with headaches. My stomach twisted whenever I heard Ethan's voice. My hands shook when my mother mentioned money. Even small sounds in the house made my nerves jolt like exposed wires. I tried confiding in Sam at work again, but when he suggested I move out immediately, I felt myself panic. Move out. The idea sounded so simple on paper. Just leave. Just walk away. Just cut ties. But nothing about my family was simple. I was caring for my father. I was tangled in their finances, and the guilt of abandoning them, even when they had already abandoned me emotionally, still clung to me like a heavy coat I could not take off. One morning, while preparing my father's medication, my mother walked into the kitchen and said casually, "You know, if you were more supportive of Ethan, he would not be so stressed." That sentence broke something inside me. It was not shouted. It was not vicious. It was simply delivered as if it were an obvious truth, as if Ethan's behavior were my responsibility, as if his gambling, lying, and violence were somehow caused by me. My throat tightened and I felt a tear slip down my cheek before I could stop it. My mother frowned. "Do not start crying. You are too old for tantrums." I looked at her, then really looked at her. The woman who taught me to hide my pain. The woman who expected me to carry Ethan's burdens. The woman who never once paused to consider what I needed. The psychological pressure had reached a breaking point. I felt it in my bones, in my breath, in the hollow ache behind my ribs. And in that moment, something hardened inside me, a quiet, steady resolve. For years, they had crushed me with expectations, guilt, and responsibility. For years, they had shaped me into a version of myself that existed only to serve Ethan. But the cracks were spreading. The truth was pushing through. And soon, very soon, everything they built on my back would collapse. The breaking point did not arrive as a dramatic explosion, but as a slow erosion, the kind that chips away at the edges of your sanity, until one night you realize you are standing on the last fragment of stability you have left. Ethan had always been volatile, but when alcohol entered the equation, he became someone unrecognizable, someone whose rage filled every corner of the house like a gas leak waiting for a spark. His drinking started subtly the way most spirals do. A few beers after work, a bottle tucked beneath his bed, whiskey in his coffee mug. My parents ignored it, brushing off obvious signs. He is only relaxing. He is tired. He needs something to help him sleep. Even when he stumbled into the house at 3 a.m, reeking of liquor, even when he knocked over chairs and slurred curses at our mother for waking him, they insisted it was not a problem. They insisted it would pass. But it did not pass. It grew, and with every drink he poured down his throat, the house became a little darker, a little louder, a little more dangerous. I first sensed how bad it had become one night when I arrived home from a double shift at the hospital. My body ached from the weight of the day, and my eyes burned from the fluorescent lights I had lived beneath for 12 hours straight. When I opened the front door, the air inside the house smelled like stale beer and sweat. The living room lamp flickered, casting a dim glow over Ethan, who was sitting on the couch with a half-empty bottle of whiskey dangling from his hand. His head lolled back, eyes unfocused, and when he noticed me, he let out a low laugh that scraped across my nerves. "Look who finally decided to come home," he said, slurring the words. "The family savior." His voice had that mocking edge I had heard too many times, but tonight there was something else beneath it. Something meaner. Something reckless. I ignored him and walked toward the kitchen, hoping to slip past without incident, but he pushed himself off the couch and staggered after me. "You think you are so much better than everyone else?" he muttered. Little Miss Perfect Nurse. Too good to be part of this family. I could feel the familiar anxiety rising in my chest, the kind that made my breath shorten and my hands tremble. I told myself to stay calm, to not provoke him, to not give him any reason to escalate. Ethan leaned heavily against the counter as I filled a glass of water. His breath hit my neck hot and sour with alcohol. "You owe me." "You know," he said suddenly. "I owe you nothing," I replied quietly, keeping my voice steady. He slammed his hand on the counter, making me jump. "Do not walk away from me." I took one slow step back, measuring the distance between us. Ethan noticed and smirked. Scared. The word cut deeper than I expected, not because it was untrue, but because he enjoyed saying it. He straightened up or tried to wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "They would not let me borrow money," he said, pointing toward the hallway where my parents were asleep. "But you will. I need cash, right now." My stomach twisted. "I am not giving you money, Ethan. I do not have money for you." He took a shaky step toward me. "You do. You always do. You think you are the only one who works hard. You think you are the only one who matters." His voice climbed louder, angrier. "You think you can judge me." I backed up until I hit the refrigerator behind me. Ethan's eyes were glassy and unfocused, but his rage was sharp and clear. He lifted the whiskey bottle, pointing it at me like an accusation. "You ruined everything," he spat. "You were supposed to help. You were supposed to fix this. And now you will not even do the bare minimum." His words made no sense, just fragments of resentment shaped by alcohol and entitlement. I glanced toward the hallway, hoping my parents had heard the yelling, hoping someone would step in, but the house stayed silent. Ethan slammed the bottle onto the counter so hard that liquor splashed across the tiles. I flinched as he grabbed the front of my shirt, pulling me toward him. I could smell the alcohol on his skin, strong enough to make my eyes sting. "Give me the money," he growled. "Now." I tried to shove him back, but he was stronger than he looked, fueled by drunken adrenaline. His hand slid up to my throat, fingers digging into the sides of my neck as he pushed me against the refrigerator. Panic surged through me. My vision blurred. I clawed at his wrist, gasping for breath. Ethan leaned closer, his face twisted with fury. "You think you can stand against me. You think you can deny me. You are nothing without this family. Nothing." The room tilted as black spots formed at the edges of my vision. Just when I thought he would squeeze harder, my mother's voice echoed down the hallway. "Ethan, stop making noise." Some nights I wondered whether she genuinely did not understand what he was capable of, or whether she simply did not care. Ethan hesitated for a moment, distracted by her voice, and I used the distraction to shove him backward with all the strength I had left. He stumbled, tripping over the edge of the rug, falling onto the floor with a dull thud. I gasped for air, clutching my throat, my breaths coming in short, painful bursts. Ethan groaned, rolling onto his knees. "You are dead," he muttered. "Just wait. You are dead." I ran to my room and locked the door. My hands shook violently as I slid down to the floor, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I pressed my forehead against my knees and tried to slow my breathing. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not tonight. Not for him. From the hallway, I heard Ethan stumbling, swearing, slamming his fist against my door. "You cannot hide in there forever. You will give me what I want. You always do." His voice was a deep, drunken snarl dripping with hatred I had never heard so clearly before. After several minutes, he finally walked away, muttering to himself. Silence returned, but the silence felt worse than the yelling because it held the truth I had been avoiding for far too long. Ethan was dangerous, not just irresponsible, not just troubled, dangerous. And my parents, blinded by their delusions, were willing to let him be dangerous if it meant protecting their precious son from reality. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening to every sound, waiting for his footsteps, waiting for another knock, waiting for the moment he decided to try again. The psychological pressure had cracked. The physical threat had emerged. And deep in my chest, something cold and certain formed. This was going to get worse. Much worse. And when it finally exploded, no one could say they were surprised. The night everything shattered did not begin with a scream or a slammed door. It began with a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. A silence that made my skin prickle the moment I stepped through the front door after an exhausting shift. The house was too still, the air too warm, and the lights too dim. I could sense trouble in the way one senses a coming storm without seeing the clouds yet. My father's oxygen machine hummed faintly from his room, but there were no voices, no television, no clatter of dishes. Nothing but that looming silence. I set my bag down already on edge and walked toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water. The moment I switched on the light, I froze. Ethan was sitting at the dining table hunched over with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. His foot tapped rhythmically against the wood like a ticking bomb. There was no alcohol bottle beside him this time, no half-finished beer can, no smell of whiskey. But the intensity in his eyes when he lifted his head told me everything. He had been drinking somewhere else. Or worse, he was sober and fully aware of what he wanted to do. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and hard. "We need to talk," he said. His voice sent a ripple of fear straight through my chest. Every instinct told me to turn around, go to my room, lock the door, and stay there until morning. But a small part of me believed, desperately foolishly, that maybe this time he wanted to talk rather than fight. I took a cautious step forward. "What do you want, Ethan?" He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, and smirked. "You know exactly what I want. The money. The debt." My stomach twisted violently. "I already told you I am not paying off your gambling mess, Ethan," I said firmly. "It is not my responsibility." He stood up so fast the chair behind him scraped loudly across the floor. "Responsibility!" His laugh was sharp and cruel. "Everything in this family is your responsibility. That is how it has always been." He walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps, closing the distance until I could see the faint tremor in his jaw, see the rage simmering just beneath the surface. I stepped back instinctively, but he followed, matching me step for step, like a predator stalking prey. "You think you can run away from this? You think you can hide in your little room and pretend we do not exist?" His voice rose, growing louder with each word. "But the moment things get tough, you blame us. You act like you are the victim." My voice shook despite my effort to stay calm. "I am not blaming anyone. I am saying this is your mess, Ethan. You made these choices. You made these debts. I am done paying for them." His eyes darkened. He took another step, and I backed into the edge of the kitchen counter. A cold jolt ran through me as I realized there was nowhere else to go. "You think you can lecture me?" he spat. "You think you are better because you wear scrubs to work. You think you are smarter, stronger, more important. You have always acted like you are above us." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, Ethan slammed his fist into the cupboard beside my head. The sound exploded through the kitchen like a gunshot. My breath caught in my throat. Ethan leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. "You are going to pay what you owe." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Or you are going to regret it." Fear crawled up my spine. I slid sideways along the counter, trying to put space between us. Ethan grabbed my wrist and yanked me back with enough force to make me stumble. "Stop!" I hissed, trying to pull free. "Let go of me." But he tightened his grip, his fingers digging into my skin. "You think I am playing with you, Christina?" His voice vibrated with fury. "You think I am not serious?" My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it echo in my ears. Ethan let go of my wrist only to shove me hard in the shoulder. I fell against the counter, pain shooting up my arm. Before I could straighten up, Ethan grabbed me by the front of my shirt and pushed me backward. My back hit the wall with a sickening thud. Ethan leaned in inches from my face. "You owe me $12,000, he snarled. $12,000. You are going to pay it. I shook my head, voice trembling. No, I am not giving you anything. His expression twisted. Wrong answer. He slammed his forearm across my chest, pinning me to the wall. My breath caught painfully as pressure pressed against my ribs. I tried to push him away, but he was stronger, fueled by rage, desperation, and years of believing he was untouchable. Ethan pressed harder, forcing the air out of my lungs. You will do what I say. His voice shook with fury. Or I swear to God. Suddenly, my father's voice came from the hallway. Ethan, stop yelling! Ethan turned his head slightly, just enough to shout back, Stay out of it! Dad did not respond. He simply wheezed weakly, too tired to intervene. My mother, however, stormed out of their bedroom, eyes blazing. Ethan, what is happening? Ethan stepped back from me only slightly, but his hand still gripped my shirt. She took in the scene with a single glance, me breathless, pinned against the wall. Ethan's fist curled, and instead of horror, disappointment flashed across her face. Christina, what did you do? My chest tightened with disbelief. Mom, he attacked me. She cut me off with a sharp gesture. You always find a way to provoke him. Ethan looked at me smugly as if her words were proof he was right. Then he turned back to me and shoved me again. This time, I lost my balance. I stumbled sideways, crashing against the kitchen island. My hip hit the edge painfully, sending a jolt through my body. Ethan approached again, faster, angrier. You think this is a game? His voice was low, trembling. You think you can ruin my life and walk away? I grabbed the countertop to steady myself and forced the words out. I am not responsible for your choices. I am not paying. Something snapped in him, his face contorted with fury so sharp it no longer looked human. He charged at me, grabbing me by the hair and pulling so hard my neck whipped backward. Pain shot down my spine. I screamed, clawing at his hand, trying to loosen his grip. He dragged me away from the kitchen, yanking me toward the living room. My feet scrambled for traction on the floor, but he was stronger, fueled by a fire that had burned unchecked for years. He threw me forward. I fell hard, my knees hitting the floor first, then my hands, then my shoulder. The impact rattled my bones. Before I could move, Ethan kicked me in the side. The breath was knocked out of me in a single agonizing burst. My vision blurred. I gasped desperately, trying to inhale. Ethan kicked again. This time, I rolled onto my back to protect myself. He loomed over me, face red, chest heaving. Get up, he roared. Get up and take responsibility. I curled inward, clutching my ribs as agony radiated through my side. I could barely breathe, let alone stand. Ethan reached down, grabbed my arm, and jerked me upward. My legs gave out immediately, and I collapsed again. You pathetic excuse for a sister, he spat. You think you are too good for us, too good to help your own family. The room spun violently. Ethan's voice was muffled, warped by the pounding in my ears. Through the haze, I heard my mother yelling, Ethan, enough! But there was no conviction in her voice, no real fear. Only frustration that things had escalated to this point. My father coughed weakly from the hallway, but did not move. Ethan lifted his fist. For a moment, everything slowed like the world paused between heartbeats. I braced for the hit, squeezing my eyes shut, praying instinctively. But then Ethan froze. His gaze shifted behind me. I followed his line of sight. In the doorway stood Mrs. Foster, the neighbor who had hesitated the night he pinned me in the kitchen. Her eyes were wide. Her phone was in her hand. And she was recording. Shock rippled across Ethan's face. For once, fear flickered in his eyes. Mrs. Foster's voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. I am calling the police. Ethan took one step toward her, but she stepped back. Do not come near me. I have been recording for the last minute. My mother finally reacted, rushing toward Mrs. Foster. "Please delete that." He did not mean it. She reached for the phone, but Mrs. Foster jerked it away. "Touch me, and you go to jail too." My mother froze pale and panicked. Ethan looked from me to the camera to the open door behind Mrs. Foster, calculating his next move. Then he bolted. He ran past her, shoved the screen door open, and sprinted into the yard. Mrs. Foster backed away, breath shaky, and pressed the call button. I collapsed onto the floor, my ribs throbbing, my lungs barely working. My mother rushed to my side. "Christina, get up. Do not overreact. You are going to ruin your brother's life." Something inside me snapped so violently it felt like a physical break. I pushed her hand away. "No, he ruined his own life. And you helped him." My father stood weakly in the hallway, gripping the wall for support. He stared at me with disbelief, like he could not comprehend what was happening. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. Mrs. Foster continued filming. My mother began pacing, wringing her hands and muttering Ethan's name like a prayer. The sirens grew closer. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows. I forced myself to sit up. Pain curved through my ribs like a blade. But through the pain, through the fear, something new emerged. Strength, resolve, and a truth I should have faced years ago. This family was never going to save me. I would have to save myself. Two officers stepped through the door, eyes scanning the room rapidly. One of them knelt beside me. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" I nodded weakly. He called for paramedics immediately. The other officer questioned Mrs. Foster. "My parents, me." My mother tried to deny everything. My father stayed silent. Mrs. Foster handed over her phone. Ethan's actions were captured clearly on video. The officers exchanged a look. One of them spoke into his radio. "Suspect is fleeing on foot. Dispatch units to the area." I lay back on the floor, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the night settle over me like dust. But beneath the pain, beneath the terror, a single thought pulsed quietly in my mind. This is the beginning of the end. And for the first time, that ending did not scare me. It set me free. The moments after the police arrived felt like drifting through a dream I could not fully control. A dream in which sounds were muted, shapes blurred, and time slipped in and out of focus. My ribs ached with every breath, sharp stabs that made it difficult to sit upright, but adrenaline kept me moving long after my body begged me to stop. The paramedics entered quickly, their calm efficiency, a stark contrast to the chaos still lingering in the air. One knelt beside me, shining a small light into my eyes while asking questions in a steady voice. "Can you breathe? Can you feel your legs? Does your neck hurt?" I answered automatically, focusing on the rises and falls of his tone rather than the content of his words. My throat felt raw. My voice cracked each time I tried to speak. Another paramedic eased an oxygen tube beneath my nose and wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm. I felt the squeeze, but not the pain. Shock was doing its job, numbing me as everything spun around me. My mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands, whispering frantic lines under her breath. She kept glancing at the door as if expecting Ethan to burst back in, as if the sirens had been a hallucination rather than reality. My father stood rigid against the wall, his face pale, his fingers gripping the doorframe for balance. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not move toward me. He simply watched like a spectator at a show he did not pay to see. One of the officers approached him and asked for his account of what happened. My father swallowed hard and mumbled that I had overreacted. The officer raised an eyebrow. Overreacted. He gestured toward Mrs. Foster, who was now seated on the couch, trembling slightly from the shock of it all. "This woman has video evidence of your son assaulting your daughter." My father's face hardened, but he said nothing else. I wanted to look away, but I was too tired to move. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. The paramedics helped lift me carefully onto a stretcher. Pain flared through my side, sharp and jarring, but I clenched my teeth to keep from crying out. I refused to give my mother or father the satisfaction of hearing me in pain. As they wheeled me toward the door, my mother followed, her voice rising with desperation. "Christina, wait! Do not do this! Do not make things worse!" Her words hit me like a slap. I turned my head slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time since the attack. I saw fear there. Not fear for me. Fear for Ethan. Fear for the consequences now heading toward him. I whispered hoarsely, "He did this. Not me." She shook her head aggressively. "You pushed him. You always push him. You know how he gets." My voice cracked. "You watched him hurt me. You watched him kick me. And you did nothing." My mother's face twisted with something like shame, but not enough to change anything. The paramedics continued pushing the stretcher outside without waiting for her response. The cold night air rushed over me, bringing clarity with it. The flashing lights illuminated the yard, the porch, and the familiar shadows of the house I once hoped would feel like home again. Now it looked like a place I needed to escape permanently. They loaded me into the ambulance gently. The interior smelled of antiseptic and plastic. The doors closed with a soft thump, sealing me inside a cocoon of bright lights and professionalism. One of the paramedics sat beside me, securing the straps as he spoke. "We are taking you to County General. They will run imaging and check for internal injuries. Your breathing is shallow. You may have rib fractures." I nodded faintly. The words felt distant, like hearing a medical briefing for someone else. The ambulance started moving, and the vibration of the engine sent ripples of pain through my side. I focused on the ceiling lights, counting them as they flickered past. 1, 2, 3. Every number anchored me to consciousness. At some point, the paramedic asked if I had any allergies. I answered weakly. He asked if I could describe the assault. Tears blurred my vision, but not because of emotion, because my head still throbbed and the world refused to stay still. I gave him the details. He listened carefully, nodding as he wrote on a clipboard. When the ambulance arrived at the hospital, they wheeled me straight into a trauma bay. Nurses moved around me with smooth coordination, blood pressure readings, pulse checks, questions, more questions, pain charts. I tried to answer everything, but speaking hurt. One nurse placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You are safe now." That simple sentence nearly broke me. Safe. A word I had not felt in years. They ordered X-rays, a CT scan, and blood work. They placed an IV in my arm, and the cool sensation of fluids entering my vein washed over me with a strange comfort. Lying on the CT table, staring at the sterile ceiling tiles, I finally allowed tears to slip down my temples, not because of pain, because the truth was finally undeniable. My family had stopped being my family long ago. I just had not wanted to see it. When the doctor returned with the results, her expression was serious but calm. "You have 2 fractured ribs, significant bruising along your torso, and a mild concussion. No internal bleeding. You are lucky it was not worse." Lucky. I almost laughed. Luck was not something I associated with the events of the night. She asked if I felt safe going home. My throat tightened. "No, not with them. I want to stay somewhere else." She nodded sympathetically. "The police officers outside want to speak with you again once you are ready. They need an official statement." My pulse quickened. This was it. The part where I had to say out loud everything I had been too afraid to admit. A social worker entered the room shortly after. She sat down gently and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "You are not alone. What happened to you is not your fault. And you have options." She explained restraining orders, emergency housing, legal rights support networks. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying the weight of authority I needed to hear. When the police returned, they recorded my full statement. I described everything: Ethan's rage, his drinking, his demands for money, his escalating violence. The moment he pinned me against the wall, the kicks, the threats, the years of favoritism that emboldened him, the fraudulent debt in my name, the lies my parents used to justify everything. I told them everything I had kept buried for years. When I finished, one of the officers nodded solemnly. "You did the right thing coming forward. Ethan is dangerous. We will find him." After they left, the hospital room felt strangely quiet. I stared at the monitor beeping softly beside me and realized something I had not dared believe earlier. This was the first time in my life I was physically separated from my family and protected by people who took my pain seriously. The first time, no one asked me to be strong for Ethan. The first time, help arrived for me instead of him. As I lay there, ribs aching and head pounding, I felt a fragile but steady resolve settle inside me. I had survived the worst of Ethan's violence. I had survived the betrayal. And now, for the first time, I had a chance to build something safe. Something mine. Something away from them. The fight was not over, but the battle had finally begun on my terms. The morning after the attack, I woke in the hospital to the faint hum of machines and the distant beeps of monitors echoing down the hallway. My ribs throbbed with every inhale, a deep ache that reminded me with stubborn persistence that the danger had been real, that the violence had not been imagined or exaggerated the way my parents had always insisted. A nurse entered softly, checking my vitals with practiced movements. She smiled gently and told me the officers were waiting outside, ready to update me if I felt alert enough to talk. I nodded weakly. She left, and two uniformed officers stepped into the room, each holding a small notepad. One of them, Officer Daniels, offered me a sympathetic smile. "We located your brother early this morning," he said. "He was hiding in a friend's garage 2 blocks away. He's in custody now." Relief washed over me, but it was brief, a flicker of safety overshadowed by lingering dread. He continued, "There is something you should know, Miss Hale. Something we found in his file. Something you may not be aware of." I felt my stomach tighten. I nodded for him to continue. "Your brother has a prior record." "Significant." My breath stalled. "What do you mean?" Officer Daniels shifted his weight. "Approximately 3 years ago, there was a reported domestic violence incident involving your brother and his then-girlfriend, a woman named Kayla Simmons." He paused, letting the words settle in. I blinked several times, struggling to wrap my mind around it. Ethan had dated a girl named Kayla very briefly, but I remembered so little about her. I did not even know they had lived together for a while. The officer pulled out a small folder, flipping it open. He did not hand it to me, but read from it. According to the report, neighbors called 911 after hearing screaming. When officers arrived, they found the girlfriend with a swollen face, bruising along her neck, and a fractured wrist. My breath hitched. Ethan had done this before. My skin prickled painfully as the room felt colder. The officer continued. "She initially pressed charges, but later withdrew them. Case closed. No further action." I frowned. Why would she withdraw the charges? He exchanged a glance with the other officer before answering. "Witnesses later told us your parents visited her, several times. They claimed your brother was under emotional stress, that he did not know what he was doing, that it was all a misunderstanding. They promised Ethan would receive help. They also offered financial compensation." The officer hesitated at the last part. A lump formed in my throat. Money. My parents had used money to cover up Ethan's violence. Money that likely was not even theirs. My hands trembled where they rested on the blanket. Something inside me hardened further. Officer Daniels flipped another page. "There's more. The girlfriend's family reported feeling pressured into dropping charges. When they tried to resurface the issue a year later after another violent episode, your parents intervened again. They visited the family, threatened to sue for defamation, and insisted the girl was lying. The family backed down. No charges were filed." My mind reeled. I clutched the blanket, squeezing the fabric so tightly my knuckles tingled. Ethan had been violent for years. Not just impulsive, not just troubled. Violent. Dangerous. And my parents had known. They had hidden it, protected him, allowed him to continue hurting people, including me. Suddenly, every moment from my childhood came rushing back with new clarity. Each memory reshaped by this revelation. Ethan throwing a remote at my head when he was 13. Ethan grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise when we were teenagers. Ethan pushing me down the stairs once during an argument, my parents insisting I had slipped. The neighbors who avoided our house. The whispers I overheard. The odd looks. The hushed conversations. The way my mother always rushed to Ethan's side when he grew angry, as if he were a ticking bomb she needed to disarm gently. They had always known, And instead of getting him help, instead of protecting others, instead of ensuring he faced consequences, they had shielded him. Again and again and again. Officer Daniels looked at me with sympathy. I'm telling you this because it shows a pattern, and it gives more weight to your case. He hesitated before adding, your parents' involvement in suppressing the previous case may also be relevant depending on what additional evidence surfaces. A chill ran through me. My parents had not only enabled Ethan, they had obstructed justice. They had chosen him so completely that they abandoned any sense of morality or responsibility. And now I was paying the price. The officer closed the folder gently. I know this is a lot, but you need to know you aren't the first person he has hurt. My throat tightened painfully. I forced a whisper. And they still protected him. My parents still protected him. The second officer nodded. It appears so, and based on what you've described, it seems they expected you to keep doing the same. I swallowed hard, but the bitterness in my mouth did not fade. For my entire life, I had believed that Ethan was a product of favoritism, indulgence, and denial. But he was more than that. He was a pattern, a repeated danger, a man capable of serious violence, and the people who raised us had chosen to ignore it, bury it, hide it, even from me. When the officers left the room, I stared at the wall for a long moment, feeling as though my world had shifted beneath me. It was not just that Ethan had attacked me, it was that he had done it before to someone else. It was that my parents had covered it up. It was that they had known exactly what he was capable of and allowed him to stay in the same house with me. It was betrayal, layered upon betrayal. The nurse returned, adjusting my IV, unaware of the storm raging in my mind. She asked about my pain levels. She offered water. I answered on autopilot. All I could think about was Kayla, the woman who came before me. A woman who had been hurt, who had been silenced, who had been forced into dropping charges she should never have been pressured to withdraw. I felt connected to her in a strange, heartbreaking way. Two women separated by time, linked by the same violence and the same neglect from the people responsible for stopping it. How many others were there? How many stories like mine had been dismissed, ignored, erased? The thought made my skin crawl. Later that afternoon, a social worker returned with more paperwork and a list of resources. Shelters, therapists, legal advocates. She spoke to me gently, encouraging me to seek support, reminding me that I did not have to go back to that house. As she spoke, something inside me shifted again. Resolve, strength, anger sharpened into clarity. My parents had hidden Ethan's violent past. They had enabled him. They had protected him. They had sacrificed me to keep his secrets safe. But they would not do it again. Not with me. Not with anyone. Not this time. As the sun dipped through the hospital blinds, casting long shadows across the room, I whispered to myself almost like a vow. This ends now. It was the first promise I made fully to myself, and it was the first step toward tearing down the toxic world my parents had built around Ethan, a world I was no longer willing to be part of. The day I learned the full extent of Ethan's violent past was also the day I realized I could never return to the life I had left behind, not even temporarily. But what I did not know yet was that another truth waited just around the corner, a truth that would reshape everything I believed about my place in that family, a truth that would become the foundation of my final act of freedom. It began with a phone call from the property manager of the house my parents lived in. I had listed her number as a work reference long ago, and she still checked in occasionally about maintenance concerns. When my phone buzzed, I expected nothing more than a standard update about a plumbing repair or a reminder about seasonal inspections. Instead, the manager's voice came through the line with polite concern. "Christina, I hope you are all right. I heard about the police at the house." My stomach clenched. Somehow, news spread quickly in small towns. I thanked her for reaching out and told her I was at the hospital recovering. She hesitated before continuing. "Since I have you on the phone, there is something we need to discuss about the property." I felt tension coil in my chest. My parents rarely shared information about the house with me, but I knew they rented it month to month from someone who had purchased it after they lost their mortgage years ago. I braced myself for bad news, thinking the property manager was calling about unpaid rent or a possible eviction due to the chaos created by Ethan. But what she said next made everything shift into slow motion. The annual tax documents are ready. I assume you would like them mailed to your new address instead. My breath caught. Tax documents. For the landlord. Confusion bled into disbelief. I am sorry, I said slowly. What do you mean? She cleared her throat softly. The ownership papers. The tax forms for Hale Ridge LLC. Since you are the registered owner, I want to confirm where to send them. For a moment, I could not speak. The phone felt heavy in my hand, the room spinning slightly. I stared at the wall, my mind scrambling to understand. Hale Ridge LLC, registered owner, me. It took several seconds before the memory punched through the fog. Years ago, before moving out of state, my parents had nearly lost the house after falling behind on mortgage payments. At the time, they had called me in tears, terrified of losing the one place they had ever lived. I was young, but determined to help them. I had been saving aggressively from my hospital job, picking up extra shifts, living frugally. I paid their mortgage for a few months, but even then I sensed something was unstable. Ethan was already causing trouble. Bills were often late. My parents blamed everything except themselves. I realized I could not pour my savings into a house that would eventually collapse under their mismanagement, so I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I purchased the house myself when it went into foreclosure, but I did it quietly through an LLC. My mentor and former supervisor helped me create. He was the silent business partner helping me navigate the legal structure, ensuring everything was filed correctly. My parents never knew the buyer was me. They believed some anonymous investor had purchased it and agreed to rent it back to them. The property manager ran all communications through a work email I had created for the LLC. It was safer that way. Cleaner, less emotional. And in the chaos of leaving home, starting my job, and building my independent life, I had tucked the truth away in the back of my mind, letting the manager handle rent collection and maintenance while I continued living my life far away from the family drama I had forgotten. Or maybe I had chosen to forget. But now, lying in a hospital bed with bruised ribs and a battered spirit, the truth returned with breathtaking clarity. I owned the house, the roof over their heads, the walls where Ethan attacked me, the kitchen where my mother accused me, the hallway where my father turned away. All of it. Mine. Not theirs. Mine. And suddenly a sense of power I had never felt before settled into my bones. Quiet. Heavy. Righteous. This house. The place where they hurt me, the place where they enabled Ethan, was not their safe haven. It was a place they occupied only because I allowed it. A place I had saved. A place I had paid for. A place I controlled. The property manager continued speaking, unaware of the storm of realization happening inside my mind. We also need to discuss the unpaid rent, she said carefully. They are 3 months behind. I closed my eyes. Of course they were behind. They always were. Always making poor decisions, always expecting someone else to save them. I steadied my breath and replied, "Thank you for letting me know. I will handle it." She assured me she was available for any follow-up and ended the call. The phone slipped from my hand onto the blanket. My heart thudded against my ribs, not with fear, but with clarity. Everything suddenly made sense. My mother's desperation, my father's cold silence, Ethan's entitlement. They had treated me like a resource my entire life, something to use, something to drain. But the ultimate twist one they did not even realize yet was that they depended on me far more than I depended on them. I owned the house they lived in. Their shelter was tied to me. Their stability was tied to me. Their comfort existed because I allowed it to. And now, after everything they had done after Ethan's attack, after their lies and manipulation, they would finally face the truth. My truth. Later that afternoon, the police returned to the hospital with updates about Ethan's arrest, and the social worker checked on me again. But my thoughts drifted constantly to the house, to the papers, to the power that had quietly been mine all along. When the sun dipped low, casting a warm orange across the hospital room, I asked for my bag. Once alone, I reached inside and pulled out the small black folder I kept with important documents. Birth certificate, credentials, emergency contacts. And near the back, crisp and protected beneath a plastic sleeve, were the original LLC documents. Hale Ridge LLC, owner Christina Hale. I traced my finger over the letters, remembering the moment I signed them, the relief I felt knowing my parents would not be homeless. Back then, it had been an act of love, of duty, of guilt. Now it was something else. A lifeline, but not for them. For me. A path to freedom. A way out. A tool for justice. A weapon they never saw coming. In that room, surrounded by beeping machines and sterile curtains, a plan began to form. Careful, precise, legal, unshakable. I would not scream. I would not fight physically. I would not stoop to their level. No, I would use the structure of the very system they had ignored. I would use property law. I would use documentation. I would use evidence. And I would reclaim the part of my life they tried so hard to break. They thought they had power over me, but they lived in my house, my property, my rules, and they had no idea what was coming. That night, as the hospital grew quiet and the hallway lights dimmed, I stared at the folder in my hands and whispered to myself, "This is where everything turns." And it did, because in the end, what destroys a toxic family is not violence. It is truth. And I finally had all of it. The moment I realized the house legally belonged to me, something fundamental inside me shifted. Not violently, not like the breaking of a bone, but slowly, deliberately, like a lock turning after years of rust. For the first time in my life, I held real power over the people who had spent decades controlling me. Not emotional power, not moral authority, actual tangible leverage. And I knew I would use it, not out of cruelty, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because if I did not end this cycle, it would swallow me whole. Lying in my hospital bed that night, I mentally reconstructed the past 48 hours. Ethan's attack, my mother's accusations, my father's indifference, the fraud in my name, the years of manipulation, the truth about Ethan's past violence. All of it layered like sediment at the bottom of a river, settling into something dark and heavy. But now the current was shifting. I had clarity, and clarity demanded action. I pulled out the documents again, studying the LLC paperwork with new intention. The hospital lights made the letters gleam, each line of legal text becoming more than ink on paper. It was protection. It was justice. It was my escape plan. I knew I could not confront my parents directly. They would deny everything, twist everything, make themselves the victims. So I needed something undeniable, something final, something they could not talk their way out of. The eviction process, legal, clean, and entirely within my rights as the property owner. If my parents wanted to treat me like an enemy, then I would stop pretending to be their daughter and start acting like their landlord. But evicting them alone was not enough. I needed to protect myself financially, legally, physically. I needed documentation, evidence, and I already had some. Witness statements, photos of my injuries, medical records, video footage from Mrs. Foster, police reports, Ethan's violent history revealed by the officers. These were pieces of a puzzle that, once assembled, would show the truth of who they were. I called a lawyer the next morning, a woman recommended by the hospital social worker. Her name was Rachel Mitchell, and from the moment she spoke, I felt something unusual confidence. She listened intently as I recounted everything, her responses sharp and methodical. When I told her about the fraudulent credit line, she did not gasp or sympathize. She said calmly, "That is identity theft, a felony." When I explained the ownership of the house, she paused briefly. "You have all documents," I confirmed. She continued, "Then you have more control than you think." And when I described the attack, her voice hardened. "We can file for a restraining order immediately. You are in a very strong position." Her clarity steadied me. The legal path was not a maze. It was a sequence. Step 1. File an emergency restraining order against Ethan. Step 2. File police charges formally. Step 3. Secure documentation from the hospital. Step 4. Notify the property manager. Step 5. Send a 30-day eviction notice. Step 6. Prepare for resistance. Step 7. Do not back down. When Rachel asked if I wanted to pursue criminal charges, I hesitated only for a moment. Yes, I said. The word left my mouth in a quiet, unwavering breath. I will. She nodded approvingly. He has a history. He is a danger. You are doing the right thing. The right thing, a phrase I rarely heard, especially regarding decisions involving my family. Rachel told me she would handle the paperwork and contact the judge for the emergency order. She reminded me to save every text message, every voicemail, every piece of communication from my parents and Ethan. Anything could become evidence. After the call, I felt both exhausted and electrified, my mind buzzing with all the steps ahead. I knew my parents would erupt when the eviction notice arrived. I knew Ethan would rage when he learned I was pressing charges, but none of that mattered anymore. I was done absorbing their anger. I was done protecting them, done pretending, done sacrificing. I was fighting back now, and I was playing by rules they could not manipulate. Later that day, as I sat in the quiet hospital room, the nurse brought in a small bag containing my belongings. Inside was my phone, its cracked screen reflecting my bruised face. Dozens of missed messages appeared the moment I powered it on. From my mother. From my father. From unknown numbers I recognized as Ethan's friends. The messages varied in tone, but all carried the same narrative. You are tearing this family apart. You need to fix this. You need to forgive him. You need to come home. Delete the video. Call the police and tell them it was a misunderstanding. You are overreacting. He is under pressure. You know how he gets. My mother's texts were the worst. She alternated between begging and blaming. Christina, please, your brother needs help. Christina, you are making things 10 times worse. Christina, I cannot believe you would betray us like this. I stared at the messages with a numb detachment, the emotional equivalent of examining an insect pinned beneath glass. These were the same tactics they had used my entire life. Shame, guilt, obligation, manipulation. But this time, something had changed. I no longer felt pulled toward their words. I felt pushed away. Everything became clearer with every message I read. They were not trying to protect me. They were trying to protect him. Again, as always. I blocked every number, one by one. When the final block confirmation appeared, I felt something loosen inside me, something that had been stretched too tight for too long. Silence replaced the constant buzzing of my phone. Silence for once felt like freedom. The next morning, Rachel called with updates. The restraining order had been approved. Ethan was legally barred from contacting me or approaching me within 100 yards. The police were coordinating with detectives to examine Mrs. Foster's video and cross-reference Ethan's prior case. And the eviction notice was ready. All I needed to do was sign. She emailed it to me. I opened the document slowly, the words blurring slightly from emotion. Tenant eviction notice. 30-day deadline. Violation of rental agreement. Outstanding unpaid rent. Property damage caused by tenant's adult son. Safety concerns for landlord. I read it twice, 3 times. Each line felt like a closing door. A boundary sealed. A truth finally acknowledged. I signed it. At the bottom, under my name, was my title. Owner, Hale Ridge, LLC. It did not feel like vengeance. It felt like justice. It felt like reclaiming every part of myself they tried to crush. When I hit send, a sense of calm washed over me. This was not anger, not revenge for the sake of spite. This was survival. This was the necessary end to a lifetime of pain. And I knew the war was only beginning. But this time, I was not afraid. I was ready. The eviction notice was delivered the next morning, taped neatly to the front door of the house I had once called home. The property manager texted me a brief confirmation when it was posted, her tone professional and neutral, unaware of the emotional and historical weight wrapped around that single sheet of paper. By the time I woke fully, my phone was vibrating with calls from unknown numbers. I ignored them. I knew who it was. My parents. And maybe Ethan if he had somehow managed to borrow someone's phone from the holding cell. For the first time in my life, I did not feel obligated to pick up. I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the faint morning light creeping across the tile floor, and waited for the storm I knew was coming. It took less than an hour. A voicemail notification appeared, then another, then a third. The first was from my mother. "Christina, you cannot do this. You cannot throw us out. Think about your father's health. Think about everything we have been through." Her voice cracked trembling in a way that might have moved me once, but now it sounded rehearsed, practiced, weaponized. The second was from my father. His tone was harder, colder. "You are not being rational. You are letting outsiders manipulate you. This is a family matter. You need to come home and fix this before it gets worse." Family matter. In his world, that meant silence, forgiveness without accountability, enabling without question. The third voicemail was the one that made my blood run cold. It was Ethan. His voice was low, almost whispering, but sharp with anger beneath the surface. "You think you have won. You think a piece of paper is going to scare me." His breath echoed through the receiver. "You owe us. You owe me. And you are going to pay for this." Hearing his voice so soon after the attack triggered a rush of nausea. I deleted the voicemail immediately, my hands trembling just enough to betray how deeply the sound of him still affected me. But then another realization struck. He had violated the restraining order within hours of it being issued. I forwarded the voicemail to Rachel and the lead officer on my case. Within 10 minutes, both responded with urgency. The officer replied first, "Thank you. This is clear evidence of a restraining order violation. We will document it and notify the prosecutor." Rachel's message came seconds later. "Do not listen to any more messages from him. Forward everything, but do not engage. You are protected. Protected." A word I almost did not recognize when applied to myself. Meanwhile, back at the house, the panic had fully ignited. The property manager sent me a brief text summarizing what she witnessed when she drove by to check on the posted notice. "Your parents were outside when I arrived. They seemed upset." Upset was an understatement. According to the neighbors who later reached out, my mother had read the eviction notice on the porch and dissolved into hysterical sobbing, collapsing onto the steps as if the world had ended. My father had ripped the notice down, crumpled it in his fist, and stormed into the house, slamming the door so hard the porch light rattled. One neighbor reported hearing him shouting inside his voice loud enough to carry through the walls. "She did this. She really did this. She is out of her mind." Another neighbor said my mother paced back and forth in the driveway, yelling into her phone at anyone who would listen. "My daughter betrayed us. She is punishing us for no reason. She wants to see us homeless." It amazed me how quickly they had rewritten the narrative. Ethan attacked me. They watched. They did nothing. They protected him. They blamed me. But somehow in their minds, I was the villain. By afternoon, my parents had called extended relatives, friends, church acquaintances, anyone who might offer sympathy. My cousin texted me, "Just a warning, your parents are calling everyone saying you are mentally unstable and trying to destroy them." I stared at the message unbothered in a way that surprised me. "Let them talk," I replied. "I am not explaining myself to anyone." And truly, I was done defending my sanity to people who had never cared about my well-being to begin with. Meanwhile, my father attempted to contact the property manager directly. She later called me sounding flustered. "He demanded to know who the real owner was," she said. I kept to protocol. I did not tell him anything. He became angry, said he would sue the company. I apologized and thanked her. She reassured me. Legally, everything is in order. He cannot challenge this. That truth wrapped around me like armor. As the day continued, their chaos escalated. A relative sent me a message describing the scene at the house. Ethan's friends showed up. They shouted on the lawn. "Your father threatened to call the police on them, but then he realized he could not involve the police because of Ethan's situation." It sounded like a circus. A chaotic, unraveling circus. By evening, I received one final message from my mother, longer than the others, overflowing with emotional manipulation. "Christina, we are your parents. No matter what happened, you cannot do this to us. Ethan is your brother. He was just upset. You know how he struggles. You need to forgive him. You need to retract the eviction notice. You need to stop this before our family is destroyed." I stared at the glowing screen, rereading the message twice. The irony nearly made me laugh. My family was already destroyed. They had destroyed it themselves. I simply stopped pretending otherwise. I did not reply. I blocked her new number. As the hospital lights dimmed for the night, I lay back against the pillows with a slow, deliberate exhale. Their panic did not weaken me. It strengthened me. Their desperation did not sway me. It clarified everything. For the first time in years, their chaos was theirs to deal with, not mine. The eviction date was set. The legal wheels were turning. Ethan was facing charges, and the house they used to control me was now the very thing that would force them out of my life for good. The morning of the eviction arrived with a gray sky and a cold wind that cut through my jacket as I stepped out of the rideshare car. The air felt heavy, the kind of heaviness that comes before a storm, even though the weather forecast promised nothing more dramatic than clouds. I stood at the end of the street for a moment, staring at the house that had defined so much of my life. The faded shutters, the sagging porch railing, the cracked driveway where Ethan once pushed me off my bike, and my mother scolded me for crying too loudly. It felt surreal to look at it now, not as a daughter returning home, but as the landlord enforcing a legal order. A squad car was already parked across the streetlights off, but presence unmistakable. 2 officers stepped out when they saw me approach. One of them, Officer Daniels, lifted a hand in greeting, his expression steady and professional. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "As ready as I can be." He gave a single reassuring nod. "We will handle the safety aspect. You are not to approach the house unless we say it is clear. We will announce the eviction, confirm identities, and proceed according to the court order." My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Today was not about fear. Today was about closure. The officers walked toward the house first, climbing the porch steps with firm, measured strides. I could not hear their initial knock clearly from where I stood, but I saw the door crack open slightly before my father pulled it wider, his posture stiff. The officers spoke with him briefly. Even from afar, I could see the moment my father realized I was present at the end of the driveway. His face darkened with rage, a deep flush rising from his neck to his cheeks. He jabbed his finger toward me and shouted something I could not hear. Officer Daniels raised a hand, calm and unmoved, instructing him to step back inside while they cleared the space. My legs felt heavy as I took a small step forward, just enough to hear the next exchange. "Sir, the officer said the eviction order is valid and enforceable. You were given 30 days to vacate. That deadline is today." My mother appeared behind my father, clutching a jacket around her shoulders, even though the morning was not cold enough to justify it. Her hair was unkempt and her eyes were puffy, swollen from crying. When she saw me, she let out a choked sound, something between a sob and a gasp. "Christina, please." But the officer held up his hand again. "Ma'am, we need you both to remain inside until we instruct otherwise. This is for safety purposes." My father shouted over him. "Safety! She is the threat here. She is destroying her own family. Can't you see she is not well?" His voice cracked with theatrical outrage. I almost laughed. Almost, but the moment was too heavy for humor. Instead, I maintained my position near the curb, letting the officers manage the chaos that my parents were unleashing. A second squad car arrived, followed by the property manager, who parked on the opposite side of the street and walked toward me with her clipboard pressed against her chest. Her expression was a blend of professionalism and quiet sympathy. "Christina, I am here to record the process. You just stay where the officers tell you." I nodded gratefully. She positioned herself near the walkway while the officers reapproached the door. This time, they opened it fully and instructed my parents to step outside with any personal items they had ready. My father stormed out first, dragging a half-zipped suitcase that bounced awkwardly down the stairs. He kicked it hard when it toppled, sending it rolling into the dead leaves near the porch. My mother followed more slowly, her face a mask of despair, clutching a duffel bag that looked too light to contain anything meaningful. But the real shock came seconds later when Ethan appeared at the doorway. He was not supposed to be there. He was legally barred from approaching me or the house. Yet there he stood wearing a hoodie pulled low over his forehead, his face bruised from what looked like a fight or the aftermath of his arrest. He held a garbage bag slung over his shoulder stuffed with clothes. The moment he spotted me, his expression twisted into something feral. You. His voice cracked the way a fire does when it hits sap sharp and explosive. You did this. You think you can ruin us and walk away. The officers immediately stepped between him and the steps. Sir, you are violating the restraining order by being here. You need to step back inside until we remove you. But Ethan pushed forward anyway, his foot landing on the top step, his body leaning aggressively. I felt an involuntary step backward, my instinctive reaction to the memory of his fists. My ribs pulsed with phantom pain. Do not look at him, I told myself. Do not flinch. Do not give him that power. But he kept advancing. The officer beside him placed a firm hand on his chest. Sir, step back. Now. Ethan's chest heaved with rage. This is her fault. She is punishing us because she is jealous. She has always been jealous. My father rushed toward the officer, shouting, Leave him alone. He did nothing wrong. You people are taking her side. My mother sobbed louder. Please, just let us talk to her. She needs help. She is sick. She is ungrateful. She is tearing apart this family. Her voice rose in frantic pitch. We raised her. We gave her everything. That last line snapped something inside me. I stepped closer, the officers glancing back to ensure I was safe but allowing me enough space to speak. You gave me nothing, I said, my voice loud enough to cut through their theatrics. You took from me all my life. Every dollar, every ounce of emotional energy, every breath I ever spent trying to keep this family together. And when he almost killed me, you stood there and watched. My mother choked on a sob. Christina, baby, you do not understand. He was upset. He needs support. He needs his family. I shook my head slowly. No, he needs consequences. The officers exchanged looks, one nodding as if to say the moment had come. Officer Daniels stepped forward. Sir, you are under arrest for violating the restraining order. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. My father lunged forward. You cannot arrest him. He just got out. You cannot do this to him. You cannot do this to us. My mother screamed my name, reaching toward me as if I might suddenly abandon everything and rush into her arms. Ethan snarled. You will regret this. You hear me. You will regret everything. But the officers restrained him quickly, securing the cuffs with practiced efficiency. Ethan thrashed once, twice, then realized it was useless. His body sagged as they led him toward the squad car. My father stood frozen, his face drained of color. My mother collapsed to her knees on the driveway, sobbing into her hands. The property manager stepped forward to document the moment, her pen scratching quietly across her form. Officer Daniels approached me and spoke gently. It is almost over. They will be removed. The house will be secured. You are safe. I nodded, a tightness forming in my throat. Watching Ethan be taken away did not bring joy, not satisfaction, not triumph. What I felt was clarity, cold, clean clarity. He had chosen violence. They had chosen to enable him. I had chosen to survive. The officers instructed my parents to collect the rest of their belongings. They moved slowly, dazed, as if every movement required effort. My mother packed the last of her clothes into her duffel, shaking with every breath. My father angrily shoved loose items into his suitcase, refusing to look at me. When they were finished, they stood at the bottom of the driveway, bags in hand, their faces pale and hollow. My mother lifted her eyes to mine, searching for mercy. You cannot mean this. We are your parents. I met her gaze evenly. And I was your daughter. You chose him, over and over. And today, I am choosing myself. My father opened his mouth to retort, but whatever words he planned to throw at me died in his throat. The officers motioned for them to step aside as they cleared the property. The moment they crossed the sidewalk, stepping officially off my land, the weight that had lived inside my chest for years began to lift. It did not disappear instantly, but it shifted, lightened. The property manager turned to me. "The eviction is complete. Documentation will be filed by end of day. If you want locks changed, we can arrange that this afternoon." I nodded. "Please do." The officers stayed until my parents' ride arrived. They did not look back at me as they left. Not once. The street fell quiet. The wind rustled the trees. And for the first time in my life, the house did not feel like a prison. It felt like closure. In the days following the eviction, silence settled over my life in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. Not the heavy silence of fear or anticipation. Not the tense quiet before Ethan erupted, or before my mother delivered another guilt-laden speech. This silence was different. It was spacious. It breathed. It allowed me to think without flinching. But beyond that silence, consequences had already begun to ripple outward, touching every part of my parents' and Ethan's lives, each ripple growing sharper and more inevitable. The morning after the confrontation, Rachel called to update me on the legal proceedings. Ethan's restraining order violation had been filed immediately. The voicemail and his appearance at the house were undeniable evidence. Because he was already on probation for his prior domestic violence case, his violation triggered additional penalties. "He's being held without bond until his hearing," Rachel explained. "The prosecutor is considering stacking charges. Violation of a restraining order, aggravated assault, battery, probation violation, and potentially intimidation if they determine he intended to threaten you." I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. I asked quietly, "Is there a chance he might get out soon?" Rachel paused the way attorneys do when choosing words carefully. "Based on the evidence, it is unlikely. The judge will not look kindly on someone who attacked his sister, violated a restraining order the same day it was issued, and has a documented history of violence. That history. The one my parents tried so hard to bury. The one they sacrificed me to hide. Now it was finally catching up to him, and not even they could shield him anymore." Meanwhile, the fallout from the eviction spread quickly. My parents had nowhere to go. They had no savings, no long-term plan, no ability to support themselves without leaning on someone. Ethan had drained them financially for years, and they had willingly let him. The house they once assumed would always belong to them was gone. Or rather, it had never belonged to them at all. I had simply taken back what I had given. According to my cousin, who still checked in intermittently, my parents moved into a cramped, low-cost apartment on the other side of town. It was located above a shuttered nail salon, the kind of place with peeling paint, drafty windows, and a perpetually flickering hallway light. They only secured it because a distant family friend agreed to co-sign after hearing my parents' fabricated story about being unfairly displaced. The truth would have kept them homeless. My cousin described their new life in factual, unemotional terms. "Your father is angry all the time. He blames everyone. Your mother cries a lot. She keeps telling people that you are being manipulated by outsiders. People are starting to avoid them." Gossip swirled quickly in small communities. Some relatives sided with them. Others quietly believed me. But none of them could ignore the truth completely. The police cars, the eviction notice, Ethan's arrest, the bruises on my face. The story they tried to sell no longer aligned with reality. Even in their new apartment, things unraveled fast. My father lost the part-time handyman job he had held for years, not because of age or health, but because Ethan kept using his phone to harass people making threatening calls that were traced back to my father's number. The employer cited workplace safety concerns and let him go. My mother applied for part-time work at a grocery store but failed the background check because of the fraud investigation tied to my stolen SSN. The charges were not filed yet, but the inquiry was active enough to flag her application. When the grocery store rejected her, she blamed me. Of course. She told relatives that I had ruined her reputation, that I had orchestrated everything, that this was some elaborate punishment for being a strict parent. Strict. As if standing idly by while your son beat your daughter nearly unconscious counted as parenting. As if draining your daughter's identity for loans counted as responsibility. As if covering up violence was an act of love. In another update, my cousin said, "Your mother told Aunt Diane that the only way she can survive is if you apologize and take them back in." I laughed bitterly when I read that message. Apologize. For protecting myself, for refusing to subsidize their chaos, for holding them accountable. The delusion would have been sad if it were not so predictable. Meanwhile, Ethan's legal troubles piled up. The prosecutor contacted me through Rachel. They wanted my testimony for the hearing and asked permission to use the neighbor's video footage. I agreed without hesitation. Mrs. Foster later called the police station herself, offering a signed statement. The officer said her willingness strengthened the case significantly. When I thanked her during a follow-up call, she sighed softly. I should have done more earlier. I should have said something sooner. He scared us all. You were brave to stand up to him. Brave was not a word I felt comfortable owning yet, but hearing it from someone who witnessed the violence made me feel seen in a way my family never had. Ethan attempted to contact multiple people from jail, trying to spin a narrative that painted himself as the victim of a vindictive sister, but every call was monitored. Every attempt to reach me directly was logged as another violation. My parents visited him twice before realizing that the jail staff documented every heated comment they made, every attempt to minimize Ethan's actions. When my father shouted that I fabricated the assault, a correctional officer reportedly told him, "Sir, the evidence is clear. Your son is not here because of her. He is here because of what he did." My cousin relayed that incident with a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. It was the first time anyone had spoken to my father with authority he could not ignore. Another layer of consequence. Another small fracture in their delusion. As for the fraudulent debt, the bank initiated an internal investigation. Rachel guided me through the reporting process. Because the credit line was established using my stolen SSN and because I had physical evidence of identity theft, the bank placed the loan under temporary suspension while investigating the signatures and application trail. If the bank determined that my parents knowingly used my identity, criminal charges could follow. Even if they were not charged, the financial responsibility would be legally removed from me. My credit score, which had plummeted from their theft, began slowly stabilizing after the freeze. Meanwhile, the landlord obligations for the house shifted entirely back into my control. The property manager sent photos of the interior after my parents vacated. Holes punched into walls, doors off hinges, trash bags left open, broken drawer handles. Ethan's rage manifested everywhere. The sight should have devastated me. Instead, it solidified something in me. This was no longer a place tied to trauma. It was a property. A structure, a financial asset, and I would restore it not for them, but for myself. While my parents' world shrank into a cramped apartment and Ethan sat behind bars awaiting judgment, my world opened in small, steady ways. Sleep came easier, my chest felt lighter. The panic that had lived under my skin for years gradually dissolved. I did not rejoice in their suffering. It was not joy I felt, it was justice. Calm, measured justice. They were not paying the price because I sought revenge. They were paying the price because truth had finally caught up to them. My parents enabled a monster. Ethan chose violence. I chose survival. Life for once reflected those choices. And as the consequences settled over them like a long overdue shadow, I realized something important. I no longer feared them. Not their anger. Not their guilt. Not their disappointment. Not their lies. The power they once held had shifted, permanently, and soon I would have something even more valuable than distance. I would have peace. In the weeks following the eviction and Ethan's arrest, my life began to take on a rhythm I had never experienced before. A rhythm defined not by fear or obligation or the unpredictable whims of my family, but by something far quieter and far more profound. Peace did not arrive all at once. It was not a dramatic revelation or a single breath of freedom. It arrived in tiny moments like fragments of light filtering through the cracks of a long boarded window. It began the first morning I woke in my new apartment. The sunlight streamed through sheer curtains I had chosen myself, creating a warm glow across the wooden floor. No shouting, no banging, no footsteps outside my door. Only silence, pure and uninterrupted. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of birds outside. The absence of fear felt strange, like leaving a dark movie theater and stepping suddenly into daylight. My ribs still ached, and the bruises were not fully healed, but my body felt lighter, less guarded, as though it finally believed the danger had passed. Healing came in other ways, too. I began therapy with a counselor who specialized in family trauma. During our first session, she asked me to describe my childhood. The words were hesitant at first, awkward, as if I were speaking in a new language. But as the sessions continued, the memories flowed more easily. The subtle comments, the constant blame, the unspoken rules, the times I was told to apologize for things Ethan did, the moments they dismissed my pain, the years of erasing myself to protect them. My therapist listened without judgment, her calm presence creating a space where I could unravel the knots inside me slowly and safely. One day, she said something that stayed with me. "You were trained to feel responsible for your family's dysfunction, but their choices were never your burden to carry." The words hit me like a soft but undeniable truth. I had spent years believing that I could fix my family if I just worked harder, forgave more, sacrificed more. But that belief had been a cage they built and I unknowingly maintained. Another part of my healing came from rebuilding pieces of myself that had been neglected. I bought small houseplants and learned to keep them alive. I cooked meals that were simple but nourishing, savoring the act of caring for myself without interruption. I signed up for a gentle yoga class at a community center. My movements were slow, cautious at first, but each stretch reminded me that my body was slowly reclaiming itself. I even began knitting again, a hobby I had abandoned years ago when the noise at home became too constant to focus. I found comfort in the repetitive motion in watching something grow from a single thread into something whole. On weekends, I visited a nearby botanical garden, wandering through its winding paths while the scent of lavender and cedar filled the air. I never expected nature to play such a role in my recovery, but there was something grounding about watching things bloom despite the harsh winters they had survived. It reminded me that I too could grow again. Financially, things stabilized quickly. The bank formally acknowledged the identity theft and the fraudulent debt was removed from my name. My credit score began to recover. I felt like I was reclaiming parts of my life, one document at a time. Each correction a quiet victory. Emotionally, the shifts were more complex. There were days I felt strong, nearly weightless with relief. And then there were days I felt grief so sharp it surprised me. Grief for the family I never had, for the parents who could have protected me but chose not to. For the version of myself that spent years begging for crumbs of love. But even those painful days felt different now. They were reflections, not traps. Acknowledgments, not setbacks. My therapist encouraged me to validate those feelings, reminding me that healing was not a straight line. Another unexpected source of strength came from the support of others. Co-workers reached out with meals, kind notes, and offers to help with errands. Mrs. Foster checked in weekly, updating me on the quietness of the neighborhood since Ethan was gone. Even my cousin, who had once kept emotional distance from our family's drama, began sending regular texts. "Proud of you. You did what none of us could." I treasured those messages more than I realized. Meanwhile, my parents' attempts to contact me dwindled. Their calls and texts, once frantic and constant, became sporadic. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I did not know if this was resignation or simply another phase of their chaotic cycle, but the silence brought relief. Ethan remained in jail awaiting trial. The prosecutor assured me that the case was strong. I did not follow the details obsessively. I did not need to. Knowing that he could not hurt me anymore was enough. Freedom came in another powerful form too. Choice. For once, I could choose how to spend my time. I could choose who to let into my life. I could choose what kind of future I wanted. I began saving for a small car. I looked into continuing education courses. I allowed myself to imagine places I might want to visit someday. I attended a painting workshop even though I was terrible at it and laughed when my canvas turned into a chaotic swirl of colors. Laughter. Real laughter. A sound I had not heard in my own voice for far too long. The most important part of my healing, however, came in a single, quiet moment. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat on my balcony with a cup of chamomile tea. The city lights flickered below. A soft breeze brushed against my cheeks. and I realized something profound. I was no longer waiting for them to apologize, no longer waiting for them to change, no longer waiting for them to see me. I had stopped needing them to understand. My freedom did not depend on their remorse. It depended on my release. And I had released them, released the pain, released the past, released the endless cycle that had defined so much of my life. As I finished my tea, watching the gentle sway of the plants I had begun to nurture, I whispered to myself, "I am free." This time, the words felt true. Not fragile, not hopeful. True. Healing was not a destination. It was the steady reclaiming of my own life piece by piece. And for the first time, I felt I had a life worth reclaiming. The day I finally let go of the last remnants of my old life was quiet, almost deceptively so. No dramatic confrontations, no raised voices, no lingering shadows waiting to strike. Just a calm Saturday morning filled with soft light and the gentle rustle of leaves outside my window. I had been organizing the storage boxes I brought from my old room, sorting through what was worth keeping and what deserved to be discarded. Most of it was forgettable. Old sweaters, nursing textbooks, a few mismatched earrings. But at the bottom of the last box, tucked beneath a faded blanket I barely remembered owning, sat a small bundle of letters tied loosely with twine. My breath caught. I immediately recognized Ethan's handwriting, slanted, aggressive, careless. These were the notes he had left over the years whenever he wanted something. Borrow money, borrow my car, borrow anything he could drain from me. Some were apologies scribbled after fights he never fully remembered. Others were demands disguised as family loyalty. I held the bundle for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything those letters symbolized. Years of imbalance, years of disappearing into the background so he could take center stage, years of guilt trapping me in a narrative I never chose. I walked to my balcony and placed the letters in a ceramic bowl I normally used for candles. The sky was a pale gold, the first warmth of spring brushing against my arms. My hands trembled not from fear, but from an unfamiliar mixture of power and release. I struck a match and touched it to the corner of the first page. The paper curled instantly, flame blooming into a small controlled blaze that illuminated the ink. The edges blackened, flaked, lifted into the air as ash. One letter dissolved, then another, until all of them disintegrated into nothing more than fragments carried away by the breeze. I watched silently, letting the heat warm my fingers. It felt like a ceremony I had been preparing for my entire life. Not revenge, not spite, closure. The kind that asked for nothing in return. When the flames died down, only gray dust remained. The wind swept most of it over the balcony railing, scattering the remnants to places I would never see. And that felt right. I whispered softly, not to my family, not to Ethan, but to the version of myself who had endured so much. "You made it out. You're safe now." The words drifted into the morning air, becoming part of the quiet. I went back inside, rinsed the bowl, and placed it back on the shelf. Nothing about the act changed the past. But it changed me. That afternoon, I hung a small framed print in my living room. It showed a single bird perched on the edge of an open window. At the bottom were the words I chose deliberately. Freedom is not escape. It is arrival. I stood there for a long moment, letting the truth of that sink into me. My family no longer controlled my life. Their chaos no longer dictated my choices. Their voices no longer shaped my identity. I had closed the chapter they tried so hard to trap me in, and as I stepped back, taking in the quiet sanctuary I had created, I understood something with absolute certainty. This was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. If you stayed with me through this entire journey, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Stories like mine are painful, but they are also far more common than most people realize. Too many of us grow up believing that blood is the same as love, that loyalty means accepting hurt, that keeping a family together matters more than protecting ourselves. If this story touched something inside you, it might be because you have lived pieces of it in your own way. Maybe you know the weight of walking on eggshells. Maybe you know the ache of being blamed for your own pain. Maybe you know what it feels like to carry the burden of being the strong one for too long. If so, I hope this story reminds you of something simple but powerful. You deserve peace. You deserve safety. You deserve a life where your worth is not measured by how much you endure. And no matter how old you are, no matter how long the patterns have been in place, your story can still change. Healing is not about forgetting. It is about choosing yourself after years of being taught not to. If this video helped you feel seen, if it made you breathe a little easier, if it reminded you that you are not alone, I invite you to stay with this channel. Share your thoughts, share your strength, share your journey. Because sometimes the first step toward freedom is knowing someone else has walked the path before you, and you never have to walk it alone.